All right, good afternoon. I think we'll dive into the next order of business.
Do you have a card? Sure, I'll put you on our email address.
So we are midway through our epic farm bill journey of a day, and I thank you for being game and hanging up with us. We have snacks and drinks over on the far wall, along with coffee to keep you nourished and hydrated and caffeinated for the rest of our day. So I now have the honor of introducing Representative Chelly Pingree. She's a certified organic farmer and entrepreneur, which I learned about. She began and initiated a local knitting cottage industry business, which has been very successful. And while a practitioner of agriculture from the production standpoint and entrepreneurial side, she's also moved on to become a civil servant. And working with the State Senate of Maine, she sponsored one of the nation's first prescription drug pricing bills, which went on to the Supreme Court and has become a national legal precedent on affordable medication. She moved on from the state to the federal level to become Congresswoman and has won victories for adult education, environmental protection, corporate accountability. She's helped limit media concentration and consolidation, promote net neutrality, fight for election reform and campaign finance reform. Her House Bill 1414 Local Farms Food and Jobs Act champions regional and local food systems, federal nutrition and anti-hunger programs, agricultural supports for dairy farmers, protection for contract poultry farmers. It fights for food waste prevention, honest labeling of genetically modified organisms in our food supply, and regulation of neurotoxic pesticides. In short, Food Policy Action has deemed her a, quote, food policy champion, and we agree. Please welcome Representative Pingree.
Hello. Thank you very much for your nice introduction. I actually don't have to give a talk now. You've kind of covered it all, but thank you to everybody who's here today. This looks like really a wonderful day, and you've had a lot of interesting speakers already, and I can see the afternoon's going to be great too. So I'm proud to be included with everyone here and looking forward to the panel that's going to be here shortly. So you heard a little bit about me. I'll just say a few things that you already heard. I live in and represent half of the state of Maine. And although I want you to know, if anyone's a Midwesterner, I was born in Minnesota. Yeah, sure, you betcha. But I moved to Maine as a teenager. I went to college there, studied under Elliott Coleman, who's one of the great gurus of organic farming. So I've been engaged in the kind of back to the land, sustainable agriculture, organic farming world for more than 40 years. I got my start there, literally being at the end of a dirt road in a cabin with no running water and no electricity, with a copy of a book by Helen and Scott Nearing called Living the Good Life, which, if you've got gray hair in the room, you're shaking your head. Yes, I know about that book. But it was sort of the original Bible of the 70s, going back to the land. Fast forward, I've been in agriculture one way or the other for over 40 years. And I own an organic farm again, as you heard. I run a farm called the Turner Farm. All experiences that I've had have been on an island off the coast of Maine, about 10 miles off the coast that you have to access by a state-run ferry. And we now grow diversified vegetables. We have winter crops. We have a wood-fired boiler that heats 3 greenhouses in the winter and 5 hoop houses. So we're sort of technologically advanced in a sense about taking advantage of being in a cold climate, but a wonderful market. And we make cheese, raise pigs, and have chickens. So a little bit of everything. And like a lot of farms today, we help to support our farm by running an inn and a restaurant. So it's a little bit of ecotourism, a little bit of organic agriculture, but it's sometimes what makes it all work is having the visitors and selling food. We're very busy in the summer, and we serve about 250 meals a night in our restaurant, so we're able to go a lot of our own food. We're our best customer, our restaurant, and then we run a farm stand, and every week we do a dinner with about 80 people in our barn, so it's a farm experience and incorporates getting to see the farm, have the experience of how things are grown, and talking a little bit about the agriculture and maybe even a little bit about the politics of agriculture, and enjoying the night and enjoying the food. I am lucky because I have that experience back at home, so I know what it is to try to balance the books on a farm, to deal with some of the issues around organic farming and the challenges that organic farmers face in techniques. As I said, I raised pigs, I've raised chickens. We had a chicken processing facility on our farm. I used to say I was an excellent eviscerator, if you know what that means, in the process of slaughtering and eviscerating chickens. But it means I also understand some of the rules that come forward, the challenges that farmers deal with around health and safety codes, and what small farmers deal with that are different than large farmers. And I try to put a lot of that into play in making public policy. I was lucky enough to serve in the state legislature before I came to Washington, so I go way back to the 90s when things like GMO labeling and irradiated food were kind of distant topics. Now they're probably GMO labeling is the agricultural email and letter that we get from people more than anything else. So now we have a whole different consumer. And that's one thing I would just briefly say about the incredible revolution and change that's gone on. I mean, back in the 1970s, if you were interested in organic food or sustainable agriculture, you were kind of a marginalized Birkenstock-wearing, granola-eating person who didn't really understand what agriculture is. Today, this is a $40 billion industry, and one of our biggest challenges is how do we make sure that the USDA and Farm Bill policy modernizes in such a way that our farmers can take advantage of better markets, better crops, better crop techniques, a better environment for the farmer, a whole lot of good things that we're not necessarily up to speed on in terms of the USDA's and congressional policy support for what should be our market. So without taking up too much time on all that, let me just go through a few things that I've done around this area. I was here during the last Farm Bill process, and I used to be a member of the Agricultural Committee, so I got to work on some of that. We put in a marker bill called the Local Food, Farms, and Jobs Act, which is how we look at this. And while Congress forgot to adopt the entire bill, which it should have, but lots of pieces came out, and that's usually our goal, is to write a comprehensive bill about all the things we care about, and then hope in the process of writing the Farm Bill or agricultural appropriations, that language or those changes get moved in. And we were lucky to have a number of those reforms, particularly ones that were around small and medium-sized farming. We feel that's one of the overlooked areas. You've already heard a lot about the areas of the Farm Bill and what kinds of commodities and things get the most support. Well, this is an area that's always under-supported, but it's an area for opportunities of huge growth, as I said, whether it's around capturing organic and locally grown food markets or just strengthening our rural economy, which is critically important to all of us who come from rural states. So some of the issues that we got into the Farm Bill were around increased investments to help farmers launch new products, better crop insurance options for diversified farm, and some of the things around the nutrition programs that you were hearing about today, helping people use food assistance benefit to purchase directly from farmers, to double the amount of money that they were able to use when they were purchasing healthy foods with their SNAP benefits, and we're hoping to continue to work on that. So now we've moved over to the Agricultural Appropriations Committee, the subcommittee on agriculture. That's the place where the annual agricultural budget gets approved every year. So that gives me a chance to look over the budget every year, have more oversight over the USDA, and work on those programs that we care about that have been authorized in the Farm Bill. I don't think I have to tell you this is a very interesting time. The budget out of the administration, what's been called the skinny budget, so the sort of outline of the budget that we've seen, the full one won't come to us until May. But that had roughly a 29% cut to the USDA. So that means the USDA is either the first, or either the second or third in line when you're looking to major cuts that have been made. A lot of those cuts go to USDA field staff. Those are the people who are back in rural communities in my state and across the country that are helping farmers who want to diversify their crops or get into a new market, deal with pest problems in an organic or sustainable way. That's a huge problem, losing those people who are there when farmers have questions and need technical assistance. It also eliminates the funding for several programs that we care about. Investments to help farmers create and market new products, grants to help farms become more energy efficient and sustainable. When you're a farmer, you've got to do everything you can to reduce the cost of your inputs, and energy costs can be significant in a lot of places. And cuts to things that are resources for sustainable agriculture. So you can imagine that my interest, and many of my colleagues will be really on both sides of the aisle. I don't think all of those cuts will be sustained, because I think we have a very good group of people who work on agricultural issues, Republicans and Democrats, who see the importance of funding these programs. So there'll be a fight if any of those really get pushed by the administration in their full bill. But we're also looking forward to the reauthorization of the Farm Bill, which is what you're here to talk about today. And I'll just give you a little bit of background on the marker bills that I'm doing this time. We will be continuing with many of the things we had in our first bill, and for all of you who are interested in getting more wonky on this, we can give you lots of information about this, and some of it's also on our website, but we're happy to give you more of the details. But so we'll do that. We'll go back to some of the areas that we went to before and push on them. We're also working on a marker bill just on organic research. This has been a concern of mine for a while. Again, if you talk about a $40 billion market out there, increasingly those commodities, and this is everything from corn to dairy to tomatoes, everything you can imagine is in demand today in the organic market. It's in demand by the largest food processors in our country. It's in demand in local communities. But increasingly that's being imported into our country because our farmers aren't meeting the demand, which I think is a travesty, because, as I said, the prices are better. It's a better environment for the farmer to work in. It's much more sustainable to our environment. There's lots of good reasons that we should be more in that. And I asked the USDA a couple of years ago to analyze for us, of all the research done at the USDA, how much of it is going towards organic research, to helping our farmers make the transition, use better techniques, use more modern techniques than just going back to how did we do this in the 1800s. Well, it's about 0.1% of the entire USDA budget goes to, the entire USDA research budget goes to organic research. So you can imagine that we're anxious to change that. So we're working on that. We need to make sure some of the designated organic programs like Organic Research and Extension Initiative are well funded to keep up that demand, and we're literally about to release that particular bill. I'm here with Kellyanne. Just raise your hand, Case. So Kellyanne works on our staff, is an incredibly smart lawyer and a dairy farmer in her background, so she's great at working at these things, and I know as soon as she gets that done, it'll be out, and we're going to let her sleep for a week after that. So, but anyway, like I said, we're going to do that. We're going to go back to some of the other things that we had in the Local Farms Food and Jobs Act. We didn't get everything in, and this is still a very pressing need, and we need to shift some of the attention onto that. And the last area I just want to talk a little bit about that I've been working on is on food waste. Some of you are very aware of this, and fortunately, every day we see new stories coming out about food waste. It's one of those topics that's really come to the forefront, and I think people are starting to understand what we do in this country around wasting food is really unthinkable. About 40%, by most estimates, of the food in this country is wasted. That costs us about $160 billion a year, and since we know so many people go hungry in this country, and we could do more to make sure people are getting food on their table, especially healthy food. We could do a lot more around that. So last year we introduced 2 bills around cutting food waste, and we're reintroducing those bills soon. One of them is called the Food Recovery Act. It's very comprehensive, and we're hoping some of these pieces end up in the Farm Bill. It's everything from incentives and protections for people who donate food on a commercial scale, investments in storing food better transportation, public awareness, just helping people to realize there's other things to do with food instead of throwing it in the trash. Helping municipalities to deal with food waste in a different way. As you know, if you throw food away, it ends up in a municipal landfill somewhere. And a lot of people think, oh, good, it just gets, composted. Well, no, it doesn't. It becomes part of an anaerobic digestion process, adds methane gas to the atmosphere, and just is increasing the problems that we already have in our atmosphere. So we're encouraging more composting programs at municipal facilities. We have companies in Maine now that are private industry that pick up food waste and compost it for people. We have anaerobic digesters in our state that are composting food waste, farm waste, and turning it into electricity. So there's so many good things we can do to make sure people get to eat that food before it gets thrown away, to make sure it doesn't end up in landfills, and there's a whole variety of ways of doing it. One piece that we pulled out, and this is the last thing I'll describe, was around the Food Date Labeling Act. And that is one way to deal with one of the biggest reasons people throw away food, and that's the label that you see on a container. And I'm sure most of you in this room have had a moment in your home where somebody has said, we should throw that food away, and the other person has said, no, it's perfectly good, we should eat it. And no one knows the right answer in that argument. So we wanted to name this like the domestic tranquility bill. So there would be no more fighting around this. But basically what happens is those labels are put on by the manufacturer. There isn't a consistent standard right now, except for baby formula. But other than that, there's no regulation at the USDA or the FDA that necessarily says what to do. So we're trying to get a standard, and it would really be pretty simple. It would just be one label would go on food that says it would be best, in some sort of way it would say, it would be best if you ate this by April 15th. And then you'd know, well, if I eat it on the 16th, I'm not going to get sick, but it might not taste as good. And some foods can last in your cupboard forever. You just want to know what the best time to eat them is. A can of soup isn't going to get bad in 6 months. It's going to be just fine in 10 years, most likely. But the other food would be the one that really is not healthy for you. Something like a deli meat or something that really isn't good, and at a certain date you should just throw it away if you see it or get it in the compost. So that would be a simple way to do that. It would not only clear up the issue in people's homes, but this is a reason that retailers throw food away all the time. They'll routinely take things off the shelves, sometimes before the expiration date, because they don't want customers rejecting the item. In 20 states in the country, dairy is required to come off the shelf on a certain date. Even though those dates aren't uniform, they may not necessarily mean something critical. And it's not to say that if you took it home, it wouldn't still be good for 4 or 5 days, or you could bake with that slightly old yogurt or something else. You could make that decision. Anyway, so we've had a lot of cooperation from the industry on that. The grocery manufacturers, or Grocery Association, is very interested in dealing with this. And it would be very helpful to food banks too, because a lot of them don't want to put expired food on the shelf and have people coming and looking for a donation to say, like, ooh, am I getting food that's going to make my kids unhealthy, or is this edible or not? So anyway, there's a lot of important reasons to get that piece done, and we have a lot of cooperation on both sides of the aisle and with the committee as well. I'm going to stop there. You've got all the highlights of the things that we're working on, as well as all the comprehensive issues in the Farm Bill that we'll be interested in and that you've heard about earlier today. And now we have a wonderful panel with us, and we're going to get them up. We have Jessica Felix Romero, Bob Martin, and Patty Lavera. So I think before we spend any more time, can they just come up here? Great.
And so this next round, thank you so much, Representative Pingree. Very impressed with your integrative work on these issues. Jessica, so there's many things in this 1,000-page document, the Farm Bill, and so many things that aren't even in it. So these missing in action panels are ways to get at the big elephants in the room that aren't in the various titles. So on this first round, we have labor, which is going to be presented by Jessica Felix Romero, Director of Communications and Insights at Farm Worker Justice and co-author of Food Justice, Combating Racism in the Agricultural System. And then Antibiotic Resistance in our Health System, by Bob Martin, Program Director of the Food System Policy Program at Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, and previously author of the Pew Research Center's Meat on the Table, Industrial Farm Animal Production in America. And finally, the corporate consolidation and the massive mergers happening in our political economy of our agri-food system, by Patty Lovera, the Assistant Director of Food and Water Watch, and previously public citizen and researcher at the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice. Thank you.
So it's wonderful to be here today. We're in a very condensed 6-minute format, so I'm going to hit go and start. It's a bit of a challenge. So I definitely want to start with a thank you for being in this room, for caring about farm workers and bringing them into the room. It's so important. I wanted to explain Farm Worker Justice is a national advocacy organization with over 35 years of experience working to defend the rights of farm workers and allied workers in the food system. I thought I'd start with a kind of explanation of why I'm in the room and how I came to the agricultural world. And that came through my research on sustainable agriculture as a peace-building tool. And this is not moving. Let's see. Maybe maybe I'll just do it manually. So sustainable as a peace building tool, and looking at the methodologies that people use to grow their food impact the way that they interacted in their communities. And so this is a photo from El Salvador in Central America, and I'm on top of a mountain doing agriculture and kind of looked out in the valley. And so that really represents my entry point into the agricultural system. And the challenge I had in doing that work was I really learned the transformational power. The methodology made a difference. The way that people grew their food in small farmers changed the way that they thought about themselves and the way that they resolved conflicts actually in their communities. And so when I came back to the United States, I was left with this question of, I've just witnessed this amazing transformative power of agriculture. How am I going to bring this to the United States system? And so, let's see. I'm going to, let me see, just see if I can get this going, because I had this every 20 seconds. All right, sorry about that. The timer's not working on it. And so coming back to the idea of how do we apply this in the U.S. context, I really thought, how do we create the structure of agriculture? And that really brings into the Farm Bill. And really the Farm Bill can create the structural barriers to address the challenges that farm workers face both as laborers and rural community members. And that's something I'd really love to bring into the room as well, is that often just the word, when I say I'm a farm worker advocate, I've already defined a farm worker as their labor function. And we really don't get a full sense of who they are. And so really want us to remember that the rural members of our communities and part of our whole system. And so parts of the Farm Bill really impact the way that their lives are going to live out. Food access, we just had a great panel on nutrition and food access, impacts farm workers. They have a high lack of access to food, nutritional issues, their rural environments are heavily impacted. And so let's remember to think about farm workers both in the service that they have about picking the food, but also the fact that they are also living in our rural communities. So as we seek to increase access to nutritious food, as we've talked about this morning, we do have to remember that over 85% of our produce is picked by hand by farm workers. And so as we have an increase for fresh food access in the United States, we also are increasing a labor demand. And so it will be a folly to not think about labor issues alongside the other goals that the Farm Bill has. And although the Farm Bill does not directly address the issues the farm workers face, the things that deal with local food systems, rural development, environmental conservation, really set the stage for the living and working conditions that farm workers face every day. So for an interest of time, I'm only going to focus on two, and that's the local food system and the environmental health conservation. So local food systems, obviously I come from a sustainable agriculture past, really need support, and the Farm Bill is one of the mechanisms to do that. But we should also be very careful not to fall into the trap that to think a local food system automatically has an implicit fix for labor. So that's something that I'd like to caution everyone in the room to always remember and take that with you, is that a small structure doesn't necessarily mean labor issues are being actually addressed. And in fact, smaller farmers are excluded from a lot of extra regulations in order to help them thrive, but it also gives less insight to the conditions that farm workers can face on those farms. So those are a challenge, and if you're interested in learning more about that, I can highly recommend the book by Margaret Gray called Labor and the Locavore. It really is a great discussion of bringing the labor movement and this local food movement together. So one of the most important ways that the Farm Bill actually can be supportive of the labor movement is in the area of the environment and conservation. Currently, farm bill policy really encourages the high use of pesticides and herbicides, and farm workers are the first line of defense and people who really absorb the most amount of pesticides in our country. In the past, farm worker advocates have really worked with, and Farm Worker Justice has actually worked with getting research writers into the Farm Bill to actually include proposals to look at counting the number of pesticides that are applied in our country, and the need for increased record keeping as well. And so although these proposals were included in our previous Farm Bill, they were put in a section that did not receive any funding. And so subsequently, they were pulled out in the most recent version. And so really effective policy commitments require both being present in the document, which was a great success, but then also funding those successes is really important. So as we kind of move into the last sort of minute or two, I wanted you in the slideshow to kind of see the faces of farm workers. And we often really don't see them. We're used to seeing images of luscious food. And as you go through, you'll see that there are farm workers of all ages, all backgrounds. We have in this slideshow, we have indigenous farm workers, Latino farm workers, African American farm workers, Haitian farm workers. So all kinds of people are working in agriculture, and I want you just to kind of enjoy seeing them and remember that they are present in our rural communities. The farm workers themselves have a huge host of knowledge. And as we've talked in the panel before, farm workers can really inform the agricultural system design. And so I want to encourage you as you come and you think about your proposals to think about how could I support farm worker agendas. Reach out to farm worker groups such as Farm Worker Justice and our allies. Reach out to actually have us connect you with farm workers. Have them part of your conversations of how your different conservation or nutrition program would work out in their lives. So the Farm Bill really lays the foundation for a large portion of our agricultural system. And it really creates the space for farmers to grow and innovate. And so by including labor in that space, we have our best chance of creating an agricultural system that includes farm workers, farmers, rural, urban, and really has the ability to feed everyone, and which is the goal that I think the Farm Bill really wants to achieve. Food and labor issues across the globe have many, many challenges. And so we're not the only country that faces this, and yet we have the distinct opportunity to be one of the first countries to create policy that really does address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank American University and the Berkeley Food Institute for inviting me. And my name is Bob Martin, as was said. And I'd also like to thank Nikki for her patience in this new format. She was very patient with me, and we'll see if she's been able to teach an old dog new tricks. The Center for a Livable Future is based at Johns Hopkins University, and we work at the intersection of food animal production, health, and the environment. And I think having antibiotic use and antibiotic resistance in food animals is missing in action in the Farm Bill is very appropriate. And I think it's actually appropriate that antibiotic use be missing in action in the Farm Bill because of the way regulatory structures were developed. Antibiotic use in food animals is regulated by the Center for Veterinary Medicine at the Federal Food and Drug Administration, and the FDA can trace its origin back to 1948 as the agricultural section of the U.S. Patent Office. But in its present form, it was established in 1906 by the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in response to the horrific conditions detailed and outlined by Upton Sinclair in his book, The Jungle. That led to a public health outcry and the establishment of the modern FDA. And FDA's regulation of drugs in human population and food safety concerns in the animal slaughter sector was a natural progression to control human antibiotics used in food animals, because most of the antibiotics used for animals and people are the same antibiotics. The USDA has never had a regulatory role in antibiotics, and that's probably, they do have regulatory roles in other areas. It's probably appropriate that they don't. When they were founded in 1862, their mission was to promote agriculture, and so they promote all agriculture, and antibiotics are used most inappropriately in the large-scale animal operations you're seeing several examples of on the screen. Antibiotics were synthesized in the 1930s by Sir Alexander Fleming, and he warned of the misuse of antibiotics in his 1945 Nobel Prize for Medicine acceptance speech. And he basically said, if you're going to use antibiotics, use enough of them. The way not to use antibiotics is low levels over a long period of time, because he had already seen in the lab in the 1930s that antibiotics or bacteria subjected to low levels of antibiotics developed resistance to those antibiotics, and they passed them to bacteria that had never been exposed to antibiotics. In 2015, the FDA data showed that 34.9 million pounds of antibiotics are used in food animal production annually. An additional 8 million pounds are used in human medicine. So if you do the math, that's 81% of the antibiotics sold in the country are used in food animal production. And by the way, that's up from the 29.5 million pounds that FDA data showed in 2013. And between 2013 and 2015, FDA has been trying to control the antibiotics used in food animal production. The Alliance for the Prudent Use of Antibiotics has estimated that the cost of antibiotic resistance in the year 2000 was $35 billion to the U.S. economy. And the United Kingdom set up a commission to do a model going forward at the cost of antibiotic use, both in terms of death and dollar value. And the O'Neill Commission estimated that by 2050, there would be 10 million deaths annually from antibiotic resistance at a cost of $1 trillion to the world economy. The CDC currently says that there are about 2,000 foodborne illnesses, infections a year, resulting in 23,000 deaths, although they admit that that number is quite low because of inadequate reporting procedures. And the way people can be exposed to antibiotic-resistant bacteria really, obviously, it's through food exposure, but that's not the only way, and perhaps not even the most threatening way. The Center for a Livable Future has funded research of concentrated animal feeding workers in North Carolina, that a high percentage of those workers are populated with methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, and they come out in the community, they carry it, they don't always show the infection, they carry it out into their populations. They tend to be low-wage, undocumented workers, so they don't get the type of medical attention they need. So that's another major way. We also funded research looking at, in the Giesinger medical coverage area in south central Pennsylvania, looking at the proximity of people living near swine operations. And those people living near swine operations that routinely use antibiotics were 3 times more likely to have a MRSA infection, not just carrying the bacteria, but a MRSA infection than people not living close to swine operations. So I think there's 2 ways to really look at antibiotic use, and they really kind of cleave on dose and duration, or how much you use and how long you use it. There is the therapeutic use, which is treating sick animals. There's no one I know that wants to reform antibiotic use that says you shouldn't treat sick animals. Everybody says that. The industry says, oh, if you want to curtail antibiotic use, you want to kill animals and end Western civilization. No, we want to treat sick animals, and part of treating sick animals is disease control, which if an animal, a bird or an animal in a herd or flock, is diagnosed with an infection, it makes sense to treat the entire herd or flock for a short period of time at higher levels of antibiotics to stop the infection from damaging the herd or flock. The real problem arises with this non-therapeutic use, and that is a lot of times typified as growth promotion, feed efficiency. Am I out of time? One more now? Okay, I better hurry. And disease prevention. Those types of uses are all the same, long time exposure with small amounts. I do think that legislation and regulations have largely not been effective in reducing the antibiotic use in food animals, but I do think there's something that I call regulation by retail, and that is consumer-driven demands of meat raised without antibiotics or with only therapeutic antibiotics, because you see both Purdue and Tyson chicken now produce most of their chicken without antibiotic use. So I think a consumer-driven, market-based strategy can be more effective. And thanks again.
right, I'm going to steal this time. It's not running yet. Hey, I'm Patty Lavera from Food and Water Watch. My missing topic from the Farm Bill that we want to make a pitch should be in the Farm Bill, isn't appropriate for the Farm Bill, is you can call it antitrust, you can call it consolidation, but we think it boils down to a better distribution of who gets to decide. A better distribution of power, which means decision-making in our food system. So that first slide was how we think about the food system, which is that it's an hourglass, and the middle of the hourglass is getting skinnier. So the steps that happen that make a bushel of wheat become the loaf of bread that a consumer buys, those steps are getting skinnier. The nerdy explanation for that is that we see concentration in marketplaces. And when you see a marketplace that has 4 firms with more than 40% of that market, it's not going to operate the way we're taught in economics classes in college the way that it's supposed to. And this is true throughout our food system. So this is one example. We were talking about wheat, we've had mergers in the seed industry, we've had loss of small farms, we don't have less production, but we have bigger farms producing more, where you mill the flour, where you make the cereal, the distribution, the supermarket. We've seen mergers and consolidation at every step of this chain. That's one example. It plays out, as these are just some of those numbers that show we're way over 40%, that line where a lot of economists say it's not going to work the way it's supposed to. So we can skip all of every step has had mergers just in that one example of wheat. I always have to throw this in here because people think that they have opted out of this system if they're shopping kind of in the natural, organic, sustainable section of the grocery store, and for a long time that was true. It isn't as true as it was. It's a $40 billion industry, and big companies are getting into the game. Sometimes they're changing their methods, and sometimes they're going out and they're buying the innovators who started it just to have it in their portfolio. So why does this matter? Why do we need to care about it if we're talking about the Farm Bill? We think there's a lot of things that change as the middle of that hourglass gets skinnier. One is what we pay as consumers. That blue line has gone up. We can have a whole conversation about that, not in 6 minutes, about the cost of food, but most consumers are not actually having a cheap food experience, and what farmers get from our food dollar, which was that blue line, is going down. And we think that has ripple effects across the food system. This is a map we've made with USDA data that is too painful to get about where animals are being raised in concentrated conditions on factory farms. We're clustering it in certain parts of the country, and we think there's 3 policy drivers that prop it up. Feed, what those animals eat; weak environmental enforcement, the impact of raising animals that way; and this consolidation of where those animals get sold. 2 of those 3 are in the Farm Bill. So the one specific example I'm going to tell really quickly is what it means in one industry of hogs. So we've concentrated where we raise hogs, who raises them. The little white blue dots you kind of show up are the slaughterhouses, right? So you see red counties that have a lot of factory farmed hogs. Coincidentally, no, are located near the big slaughterhouses that buy those animals, and we see tremendous consolidation over the years in who is buying those hogs to process them. It actually has gone up again. The most recent number, I think, is over 70% now. So that doesn't mean if you're selling hogs, you have 4 choices. In where you live, you probably have 1 or 2. That turns you into a price taker as a farmer, and a lot of farms didn't survive that. So in Iowa, which has always sold a lot of hogs, from the early 80s into the 2000s, we see a lot more hogs being sold, but the value of those hogs has gone down. So they become less of a valuable entity for each hog, and it's more of a commodification of that. And there's a lot of changes that come from that shift in the industry. One is that fewer people do it. So again, we didn't have less hogs produced in the time, we had more, but they're being produced on fewer farms, right? So the yellow bar is the number of farms in Iowa that are raising some hogs, drops dramatically, but the average size, the average number of hogs per farm went way, way up. It didn't produce less, we just did it in fewer places, and that makes a difference. It makes a difference to rural communities where individual farms are no longer spending money because there's fewer of them. It makes a difference to the environment because you put a lot of hogs in one place. That manure is no longer a fertilizer, it's a waste. And we're generating waste in counties in Iowa at a rate that is comparable to cities without sewage treatment. So there's a similar trend for chicken. You can do this for any food. This is just the ones that we've done with slides. We have a broiler belt in the southeastern part of the country. Again, those dots are the slaughterhouses. This is even more clear with chickens because you're doing it a lot more frequently. There's only so far you're going to drive them. So when you have one of these big slaughterhouses, you will have chicken factory farms in a ring around that facility. And we have a business model for chicken that is unfair. We have a business model for chicken that violates a lot of what anybody would consider a fair competitive marketplace, and we have actually made attempts, big coalitions have made attempts in previous farm bills to fix that. So the company owns the valuable stuff. They put the risk of everything, dead chickens, manure, anything with liability, on the people they pay to raise their chickens. The dollar that we spend as consumers on chickens, because of that business model, very little of it makes it back to the grower. So if you spend $20 on a bucket of chicken, 25 cents might go to that grower. This is baked into the business model of chicken, and there's a lot of people who think for years this is an antitrust violation and the Farm Bill could be a place to take that on. This has economic impacts for specific communities. This is just playing those numbers out for one community in Maryland. If we have, hundreds of millions of dollars of economic activity in chicken, very little of it actually makes it back to that farm level, and that changes the economics of rural communities. So how do we do this in the Farm Bill? Why should this be in the Farm Bill? There's multiple ways we could inject this into the Farm Bill, and it has been in the Farm Bill in the past. There could flat out be some measures on antitrust. There are specific laws for agriculture. They don't get enforced well. I think you heard about supply management and how some of those markets for how farmers sell commodity crops are run. And then there's lots of stuff that would loosen up getting people to do it a different way, and there's a lot of activity there that could happen in the Farm Bill. It ranges from assistance to new farmers, rebuilding infrastructure so we don't just have large slaughterhouses, we have a mix of sizes so people could have an option to sell animals a different way. I mean, the list goes on, but we think that gets to this system of breaking up that consolidation. And specifically, a lot of groups for a lot of years have said, we've talked about the titles in the Farm Bill, we should have a competition title. We should call it out. We should put it in there, and there should be pieces that say we need to make our markets work in a more fair and equitable way. So there's been long time efforts to say that there's specific things in livestock markets, meat packers shouldn't own animals very early in the process. There's specific things like that. There's specific reforms that dairy farmers want about the way that big co-ops operate. There should be a branch of the USDA that talks about competition. It's not really anybody's job. We have a whole situation with mergers. It involves USDA, it involves other departments too, but USDA could be a piece of it. And then we have something else in there that I forget, but there's more that should be in the Farm Bill, and we've tried before. So the last thing that I'll say, so checkoff reform. People are hearing about checkoffs, which farmers put their money into, and that money is used supposedly to benefit their product. Very controversial. A lot of farmers don't like them, and they see that money as fueling anti-competitive practices. And finally, there's a pending rule right now, it's a pretty hot topic, that came from the 2008 Farm Bill, which are sometimes called the GIPSA rules, sometimes called the Farmer Fair Practice rules, and they're in a little bit of limbo, and they need to be finished. That wasn't a Farm Bill. It's taken 2 cycles to get them to see the light of day, and it would improve a lot of the really egregious things that go on in that chicken model that I showed earlier. So these are places you can learn more about all of those things, because that was about an hour's worth of stuff in 6 minutes, so you can go look it up. Thanks.
I'm so impressed. Thank you to our panelists. And now we're going to exhale and very quickly, though, get lunch. And so if you wouldn't mind just, I think, Nina, the lunches are great. It's at, and then within 10 minutes, come back and we'll begin our lunch panel. Rudy?